Welcome to the Mary Flannery O'Connor Childhood Home here in Savannah, Georgia. And it's our pleasure to have you here today. I'll be talking and sharing a few of the stories about this very unique and creative writer that we had here in Savannah. One of the first stories we always like to share here is that since Mary Flannery was born 86 years ago on March 25th, 1925, we still get visitors here from time to time that knew her. And in 2009, I had the chance to be visited by a lady that not only was born here in Savannah 2 years before, Mary Flannery, but grew up across the street. Mary Turner Buchanan visited the house, and when I asked her to give me an impression of what she thought of Mary Flannery, she shared with me, well, Mary Flannery was just different. And so we love to tell all those differences about Mary Flannery that happened here in her childhood. Now we have a photograph here of Mary Flannery at age 3. We always like to share that there's no hint of the dark tales that she was about to write later on in her life. But things were about to change significantly in her not long after this photograph was taken. The best we can figure is that somewhere between 4 and 6, she decided she was an adult. We start off at age 4 because we have photographs of her with dolls up to age 4. After age 4, the dolls are gone. We end at age 6, 1931, because of 3 events. One was that was the year her classmates told us that she had begun calling her parents Edward and Regina. So she's on a first name basis with her parents. They're okay with that. In fact, they're not only okay with that, they go ahead and invite her to join them over at the adult mass at the cathedral here in Savannah, just across the square, St. John the Baptist. That raised a few eyebrows here in Savannah, but not as many eyebrows as she would raise that fall when she started attending St. Vincent's Grammar School for Girls, run by the Sisters of Mercy. They insisted that Mary Flannery attend their compulsory children's mass instead of going to the adult mass. Her response to that was, the Catholic Church will not dictate to our family the time I attend service. So she was known as being very different indeed from that day on. Interestingly enough, her mother was very precocious as a young girl growing up in Milledgeville here in Georgia. So we have 2 very similar personalities looking at us from that photograph there. In fact, the story we like to share down here, they would have their differences of opinion with 2 strong personalities. That's not to be unexpected. But the one we like to share down here is that Regina always wanted her daughter to be a lady at all times. Mary Flannery wasn't so sure about that, but when she was around her mother, she behaved herself. However, allow her to visit a classmate here in Savannah without Regina being present, and she could relax her standards a great deal. In fact, what's great about this house is that a while back, the house was presented with this picture of Mary Flannery around 8 or 9 years of age, visiting her friend here, Betty Jean McGuire. And it is very interesting that Regina is not around, so Mary Flannery, the one on your left, relaxed her standards a great deal. And it's kind of cute, too, that her friend Betty Jean McGuire is sitting exactly how you're supposed to be sitting, and Mary Flannery is not. And I've never seen more mischief coming out of a person's eyes in a photograph than what's coming out of Mary Flannery's there. The O'Connors, and going back to her parents, Edward and Regina, would marry in 1923 and move into an apartment that evidently was unacceptable to a cousin they had by marriage, cousin Katie. And we have her photograph on top of the old-styled radio there. Cousin Katie, whose name was Mary Catherine Flannery Sims, was very generous with the O'Connors, and when she heard that her cousins had moved into an apartment, said, no, you must move into this house. She owned several pieces of property here in Savannah, this just being one here at 207 East Charlton Street, and so they moved in, and then of course in 1925 they would have Mary Flannery. The house has been historically restored for the most part, thanks to the generosity of Jerry and Linda Bruckheimer. We were able to do that 2006, 2007, and thanks to a student at Savannah College of Arts and Design who needed a master's thesis project for her degree in historical restoration. She did the paint analysis in this room. So this is the color green that was actually on the wall when the O'Connors were here, and she did extra work and found out that the paint railings were indeed gilded. That wasn't because of the O'Connors' money. That was because Cousin Katie had that done before they moved in. The barrister that we have in the corner belonged to the O'Connors. And then down on the other side of this double parlor, We have a few more items that belong to the O'Connors. This chair, settee, and lamp were the O'Connors, and this was Mary Flannery's pram. This perambulator, we know, was a gift from Cousin Katie to the O'Connors. Unfortunately, it has suffered for being in storage for so many years. But one of the great things about it is that, true to Cousin Katie's taste in having things gilded, we have Mary Flannery's monogram on the side, just as Cousin Katie would have it. And let's go back to the library, which was the O'Connors' dining room, of course. And in this room, we have 4 of her first editions, starting off with her first novel, Wise Blood, in 1952. Up above it, we have a 59 edition of Wise Blood, but it's not in English, it's in French, so she was being translated early on. Last year, 2010, we received visitors from 20 foreign countries that know about Mary Flannery and her work and wanted to come over here and visit the house. This bookcase belonged to the O'Connors, and in it we're very fortunate to have 2 of Mary Flannery's childhood books. Now, we don't have the books open anymore because she was allowed to write in her books, but she wrote in pencil, so we don't want that to fade away. So we've gone ahead and made photocopies of crucial pages in those books because she would critique the childhood books that she was given as a young girl. And so left no doubt in anyone's mind exactly what she thought of the Fairy Babies there. Not a very good book, and she was bold enough to go ahead and sign off on that. The other children's books that we have here in the house were generously given to us by her cousins, the Florencourts, and we have a photograph of Mary Flannery with them when Mary Flannery was 10. In 1935. They were raised in the Boston area but would come down to Georgia in the summer, and they would gather and have times together. But Mary Flannery was not allowed to write in their books, so we're not quite sure exactly how she felt about them. And over here we have a photocopy of Mary Flannery's last report card here in Savannah. Now, she started out at St. Vincent's here in Savannah, but was transferred by her mother and Cousin Katie to Sacred Heart farther south here in the city. They felt that she would receive a better education there, which she very well may have, but by this time Mary Flannery has made up her mind that the only way a word can be spelled correctly is for it to be spelled the way it sounds to Mary Flannery. And if that differed from the dictionary, well, the dictionary was just flat wrong. And so you can see that her grades suffered accordingly. And we'll go ahead and go on into the kitchen. Now, the only item we have of the O'Connors' kitchen is on the table, and it's a blue and white butter dish. That was a gift from Regina to one of our docents, and so it's great to have it on display here. The other items are of that era, but were purchased or donated. But we did have feedback from a couple of our classmates again, and they let the restorers know exactly where to place the O'Connors' sink and their stove. So those items are accurately placed to when the O'Connors were here. But what we like to talk about most in this room, because you can see out back into the garden so well, is that is where in 1931 a very famous newsreel took place and was filmed. Regina used to raise chickens in the back, and it was discovered early on that Mary Flannery preferred the company of chickens as pets as opposed to dogs and cats. Dogs and cats terrified her, chickens did not. And so Cousin Katie would give her a fancy pair of bantams when she was 5 in 1930, and she not only named them, but she taught them a trick. And the trick that she taught her chickens was to walk backwards, and she was successful. Cousin Katie had contacts at the Pathé Newsreel Corporation. She lets them know about what her cousin has done. They send down a cameraman in 1931, and on the property here, shot a newsreel called Do You Reverse?, starring Mary O'Connor of Savannah, Georgia, and her backward walking hen. The rooster wouldn't cooperate the day the cameraman was here. And the joy for us is that you can go to BritishPathé.com online and look up Do You Reverse, and there the newsreel is in its entirety. Mary Flannery standing in the back, she puts a hen up on her shoulder, and then that chicken walks backwards, and it is walking backwards. And evidently that had quite an impact on Mary Flannery's life, because in a letter in 1955 she would write to a friend and say, that was the most exciting thing that ever happened to me. It's all been downhill from there. So we always like to show that to our guests. Now this modest house, which was a mirror, two houses standing side by side with the same exact floor plan, is only 20 feet wide. And something had to give, and it's our hallways up here. They're only 2 feet 10 inches wide. And we'll go ahead and go on into Mary Flannery's bedroom. Now what's nice about the bedrooms that we have here at the Childhood Museum is that all the pieces belong to the O'Connors. Regina held on to it all, had it in storage in Milledgeville, and then once a renter moved out in the early 2000s, the board decided it was time to go ahead and restore the bedrooms, and so they were able to bring the bedroom furniture down. It may seem odd to find twin pine cots in an only child's bedroom, but that's because this set was the O'Connors' original set. This is what they could afford, so we're really appreciative of the generosity of Cousin Katie. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to live in a 4-bedroom house. The bed closest to the window there was a point of contention between mother and daughter. In those days, of course, there was no air conditioning in the house, and this time of year, summertime, Mary Flannery always wanted to roll the bed over to the window to sleep at night. That made a lot of sense. But if you come over here and look at and see where how close the roof is to the bottom of the window, we understand why Regina would say, absolutely not. She didn't want her daughter crawling out there and possibly getting into trouble. However, someone had made up her mind, and so when the O'Connors would look in the morning, the bed would be indeed up against the window. Over here on the mantle, on the right side of the mantle, they have my favorite photograph of Mary Flannery at any age. And she, it's the expression on her face that gets me. She's about 2 in that photograph. But she would write something at the Writer's Workshop at the University of Iowa that always reminds me of this expression. I was a pigeon-toed only child with a receding chin and a "you leave me alone or I'll bite you" complex. And she was serious about that. Remember, she was an adult at 6 and she found herself surrounded by a sea of children. And so she didn't want them to be pestering her. Over here in the corner, one of my favorite pieces to show is a table and chair set that was crafted by her Uncle Lewis on her mother's side for her playhouse that they had in the back here in those days. That's why we have water stains on the top of it, but he did an excellent job crafting those chairs so that they would fit underneath that circular table. And they would indeed have tea parties back there. Now, Regina allowed her daughter to call her by her first name, allowed her to attend the adult mass at the cathedral, but still wanted her daughter to socialize with children her own age, so she would set play dates. And just interesting to note that if they did have a tea party back in those days and there was no tea, Mary Flannery would supply the sound effects so that everybody could know when she was pouring the tea indeed. So come on into the parents' bedroom. On the bed here, we have a peignoir that was Regina's when she married Edward in 23. And we are fairly certain that Cousin Katie provided the furniture that we have on the parents' side, including in 1925, she would have bestowed to the O'Connors this kiddie coop. Kiddie coop, Kiddie Koop, was actually a manufactured piece of furniture and was designed to prevent mosquitoes carrying yellow fever from infecting children. And we have it set up at the crib level that can be lowered to the bottom of the frame and double as a playpen, which is how Mary Flannery would put it to use once she was too old for it, because after all, she wanted her pets in the house with her, and the pets I'm talking about, of course, are the chickens, and the only way that Regina would allow those chickens in the house was for Mary Flannery to put them in her kiddie coop. And what's also a great treat for our guests here is to look out the windows. We still have some of the 1856 panes of glass that are part of those, but it is to look outside and see how the spires of the cathedral still dominate the view, just as it did back in the days of the O'Connors. right, let's go this way. Now we're on the second floor bathroom. The third floor has not been restored, but up there some interesting things used to take place from time to time when the O'Connors lived here. Again, sometimes when Regina would set a play date, Mary Flannery would decide to entertain her guests in the bathroom upstairs. It was just like this one, had all the fixtures that this one did, but before her guests would arrive, she would go out in the back. She would pick some flowers, get some greenery off the shrubbery, take it to the bathroom upstairs, and then she would go ahead and stand over the tub and she would pluck some of the petals off the flowers and let them fall to the bottom of the tub. She'd turn around, lift the lids of the toilet and array the bowl with the rest of the flowers and the greenery, and then put the lids down to hold that arrangement in place. I haven't been able to find out exactly where the inspiration for that decoration took place, but I think it was an incredibly important thing to do for the emotional well-being of her guests, because early on these were the only fairy tales that she would allow to be read upstairs. So a good thing that she had decorated brightened up the bathroom upstairs the way she did. But I still have a feeling that some of her guests went home traumatized after reading the Grimm's Brothers. But this lets us know also that early on, this was her taste in literature. These were the kind of stories that she liked. And we're ready to go back downstairs. Now, another thing that used to happen up in the bathroom is that she was writing stories even here in Savannah, usually about a family of road-traveling ducks, and they would go from capital to capital across the world. But she would annoy her guests as they were reading her stories back to her, because she had no qualms whatsoever going, "Stop, stop, read that again," when they had read something she had written that she was really fond of. Well, there are her ears again, just like with spelling. And as an adult writer, just like she did here in Savannah, she would always read her stories out loud to herself as she was editing them and rewriting them. The stories we have today of Flannery O'Connor had to pass her ears along with her eyes, because she felt that the ears were just as important to reader as the eyes were. Well, her father would stop advertising his businesses in 1933 and then try to find a job, which he finally did in 1938, but not here in Savannah, up in Atlanta as an appraiser for the Federal Housing Authority. So just before her 13th birthday, the O'Connors would leave in March of 1938 and move up there. Not long after they moved up there, unfortunately, he would be diagnosed with lupus, the same disease that would take her life in 1964 at age 39. But as she would write in one of her letters, in Edward's time, there was nothing for it back then but the undertaker. So he succumbed to it by February of 1941. Now by 1941, Regina had already moved herself and Mary Flannery to Regina's childhood home in the historic district of Milledgeville. And then Edward would join them not long after that, because again the lupus was debilitating him and taking away his strength. And then he, like I said, he would pass away in February of 1941. So just before her 16th birthday, she has lost her father. And she had very close ties with her father, not only as daughter, but she said in another one of her letters that when she sat down to write, she felt like she was writing for the two of them. So they had a literary connection between the two. So it was a very big blow for her. And so was leaving this house, evidently, because in another letter she would write that it's just about as poignant to be torn away from a house as it is a person. So this house meant a great deal to her. Her impact on the literary community, I think, was fantastic. She seemed to be well received, though she never expected to be well received. She knew that her stories were non-conventional, but she had something to say, usually about the action of grace being visited upon those very unwilling to see her. But it was the grotesque characters, the larger-in-life characters, and the violence often in her stories that she felt that she really had to impress upon the readers, to get their attention. And the literary community seemed to, especially up in the northeast section of the country, seemed to attach themselves to her stories quite quickly. But her friends and relatives here in Georgia just could not believe. They didn't understand where she got her characters from. How did she know the people that were in those stories? And of course, I think a lot of that had to do with that. Even as a young girl here in Savannah, she was always watching and listening. And so over the years, she had some rich characters to watch and listen to, not only here in Savannah, but also up in Milledgeville.